Awesome Okinawa Part 5, Remnants of the Battle of Okinawa by Shiny Visions. The Battle of Okinawa took place April 1st to June 22nd, 1945, and was the last major battle of World War II. It was also the bloodiest battle of the Pacific Campaign, resulting in almost 250,000 Japanese and U.S. deaths total. The battle was nicknamed the Typhoon of Steel because of the ferocity and intensity of the pre-invasion bombardment, the brutal fighting, and the large number of Allied ships and armored vehicles that assaulted the island. The invasion of Okinawa was the last step in a complex plan of the Pacific Campaign to reach the main islands of Japan. The U.S. had just secured a victory in the bloody campaign on Iwo Jima in March and continued to invade Okinawa in April. A big difference between the two islands was that Iwo Jima was an unoccupied island, while Okinawa had a large indigenous population concentrated in the southernmost part of the island. This factor added to the immensity of the devastation. 90% of homes and buildings in Okinawa were leveled, and as many as 150,000 civilians died, either from the battle or by suicide. Instead of trying to protect Okinawa, which was a prefecture of Japan, Japanese soldiers from the mainland used Okinawans in their battle efforts. Children were forced into frontline service, including suicide bomb attacks and as human shields. Thousands of students died on the battlefield, and if they did survive, lived with the mental wounds from witnessing the atrocities of war. The ferocity of the battle on Okinawa, with its appalling number of casualties, the Japanese determination to defend to the death or commit suicide rather than face the shame of surrender or capture, and the devastation to the people, cities, and island itself are believed to have influenced President Truman to drop the atomic bombs on Japan in an effort to accelerate the end of the war instead of the planned invasion of home islands. What remains of the Battle of Okinawa today? Perhaps the most poignant is in the memory of the Okinawans. The Okinawan people were caught between two ferocious opponents and suffered greatly because of it. Unlike major battles in the world where memorials are built at the sites and statues of the heroes erected, with maps indicating exactly where the crucial events took place, remnants of the Battle of Okinawa are instead subdued. Rather than pointing out details of combat, they reflect the people's hope for and promotion of peace. But there are also not-so-tangible remnants of the war evident today as well. The Japanese underground headquarters. It was a scene of extreme violence, where 5,000 sailors from the Japanese Navy made their last stand during the Battle of Okinawa, many armed with only rudimentary spears because the military at this point had run out of ammunition and weapons. The remains of 2,400 Japanese soldiers were recovered in these damp tunnels and rooms that were carved from the subterranean stone. This facility was built to sustain 4,000 people and was dug by hand using both soldiers and also civilians as forced labor by the Japanese. Grenade-riddled walls can be seen that resulted from mass suicides when the soldiers realized that capture was imminent. The orange on the map indicates that most of the tunnels now have been restored and are accessible to visitors. At the entrance to such a place of bloodshed and tragedy, there hangs thousands of brightly colored hand-folded paper origami cranes. Why cranes? And why are they placed here? According to Japanese lore, the crane, a type of large migratory bird, was thought to live for 1,000 years and are held in the highest of regard. Legend says that if one creates 1,000 origami cranes, their wish will come true. Also, cranes are viewed as symbols of hope and healing. And here, at the entrance of the Japanese naval underground, it is evident that many wishes for hope and healing have been made. Hacksaw Ridge. The southern part of the island of Okinawa features a series of notable ridges that cross the island from east to west. During World War II, these ridges were covered in dense vegetation and made the U.S. advance during the battle a slow and tedious process. Securing Hacksaw Ridge would provide the Allies strategic views of the landscape and was part of their plan to push the Japanese farther to the south, but the battle for this escarpment was costly. The terrain proved a nightmare for both sides. The rugged and steep topography prevented the use of American tanks, and soldiers were forced to climb sheer cliffs. For the Japanese located on high ground atop the ridge, the steep inclines prevented them from placing machine gun nests in place to fire down upon the approaching Americans. Instead, the Japanese waited until the Allies mounted the ridge and then they turned it into a kill zone. Desmond Doss, who served as a medic, was a conscientious war objector and refused to carry a weapon. He carried his fellow wounded soldiers out of the kill zone, though, to the edge of Hacksaw Ridge and lowered them to safety below, risking enemy fire each time he did so. Doss, who saved over 75 of his fellow soldiers during the battle, was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions. His story later became a major motion picture in 2016, directed by Mel Gibson. Hacksaw Ridge is located in a lovely, peaceful, park-like setting with rolling green fields, trees, and stunning views looking outwards towards the ocean. The carnage that happened here decades ago seemed unimaginable today. We were the only visitors at the time, and a small elderly Japanese man stood waiting for us at the ridge. With solemnness and single, thickly accented words of English, he pointed towards the ocean and indicated where the Americans landed on the beaches. He then pointed to different locations along the steep grade below to show us the soldiers' progress traversing up the ridge after each week of fighting. Through pointing to regions beyond and below and using single words of English, he conveyed how difficult it was for the American troops to progress to where we are standing. I could sense that he had so much he wanted to share about the Battle of Okinawa and what happened here at Hacksaw Ridge, but couldn't because of the barrier in language between us. And I had so many questions for him too. Was he here during this combat? And if so, what did he see and experience as a child? What are his thoughts about this epic battle, and what does he want people to learn from it today? But alas, that exchange could not happen, and he could only walk with us, pointing to a few other areas and a gravesite in the park. Then we thanked him and said goodbye. Nearby is Ural Castle, where for centuries was a seat of power for the Ryukyu Kingdom, for Okinawa and surrounding islands. Then around the 14th century, Ural Castle, where we are headed next, became the center for the kingdom. Ural Castle was leveled in the Battle of Okinawa, but part has been rebuilt and you can still see access openings to the Japanese naval underground. Ural Castle. In the 14th century, it was royal court, an administrative center for the Ryukyu Kingdom. During World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army set up its headquarters in the castle underground, and by early 1945 it established complex lines of defense and communications in the regions around Shuri. Overtaking Ural Castle was the goal of the Allied offensive during the Battle of Okinawa. The castle was eventually almost completely destroyed in the fighting. Ural Castle underwent reconstructions, but a fire in 2019 destroyed the castle for the 5th time, making the area shown here inaccessible today. Kakasu Park was one of the first defended ridgelines that the Americans encountered on Okinawa. This battle site was challenging for us to find because the signage for it was pretty minimal. Today it is a lovely park where we walk the paths that cut into the heavy forestation of the jungle, imagining what it was like trying to push through this dense vegetation as soldiers. In an old section of the capital city of Naha are some delightful old shops, likely there for decades and are anchors for the elderly of the neighborhood. They come not only to buy food and other supplies at these small shops, but for socialization with locals of similar age and background. This shop, owned by an elderly Okinawan gentleman, seemed to sell just a little bit of everything. And I marveled at his wares. He sold American products that locals acquired a taste for after World War II. American servicemen couldn't realize the impact they would have on the future as they gave food to the starving locals. But Spam is still a favorite among Okinawans. Another favorite is taco rice, a dish created for American servicemen post-war using the ingredients on hand. Seeing my interest in hearing me speak English, he also spoke a few phrases such as, "I like Bob Hope," and "You got a cigarette?" It seemed to be all the English he knew. I guess that he was a boy during the Battle of Okinawa, and likely survived like many other children by begging for handouts from servicemen who taught them a few English phrases, which this man still remembers decades later. Thanks for watching my video, Awesome Okinawa Part 5, Remnants of the Battle of Okinawa. Please subscribe to be notified of my next video, continuing on my Awesome Okinawa series, this one titled Life in a Blue Zone. This is Shiny Visions.